Welcome and thank you for joining me, wherever you are and however you found yourself here, whether by curiosity, insomnia, or simply the comfort of slow stories told late at night, a place of grandeur, ritual, and deeply rooted contradiction. A duty cloaked in silence, passed from father to son, generation to generation, a life surrounded by death. Tonight, we'll drift through time to the powdered streets and candlelit chambers of early modern France. In this episode, we begin with a profession few would dare claim, yet all relied upon, the role of the French executioner. But that is only the beginning. We'll wander next into scandal, a necklace, a queen, and a web of deceit so outrageous that it may have lit the match beneath the French Revolution. To explore a very different kind of prison, a palace built on ceremony, gossip, and the exquisite boredom of unimaginable wealth. From there, we will descend literally into the catacombs beneath Paris, where the bones of millions whisper stories too vast to be spoken aloud. And finally, we will emerge into the golden light of Versailles. So, settle in. You live on the edge of town, of course. No one wants to be your neighbor. Let the quiet rhythm of the past ease your mind, and let the weight of history cradle you toward rest. Now, let us begin. Imagine waking up just before dawn. The air is cool, heavy with the scent of wood smoke and river fog. Your name? Well, most know it. Some whisper it. But few say it out loud. You are an executioner, and your father was one too. You'd observe not just the mechanics, but the demeanor. Calm, composed, detached. In early modern France, the role of the executioner, the bourreau, was paradoxical. A vital public servant, but socially untouchable. Shopkeepers might refuse your coin. You could not sit with others at mass. You were necessary, but never welcome. And later, when the guillotine became standard, its angled blade would be polished to a gleaming edge, not for cruelty, but for efficiency. Your family name may be known across provinces, yet your children could be denied entry to schools. And yet, your work was considered skilled labor. It required knowledge of anatomy, precision, strength, and perhaps most importantly, restraint. It was not just a job, it was a craft. And it was inherited more often than not, like a grim family heirloom. That was the crowd's job. Fathers trained sons, sometimes uncles trained nephews. From a young age, you would learn the weight of a sword, the rhythm of a swing, the solemnity of ritual. You did not rage. You did not flinch. You simply executed the law. The instruments of your trade were kept with care. Axes were cleaned and sharpened after each use, their blades inspected for nicks. Ropes were coiled, then stroked to avoid snapping. Some of your tools would be handed down, the executioner's sword with a worn grip, or the block upon which noble necks once rested. Each item a legacy of your lineage. Some watched with horror, others with fascination. Many simply wanted to say they'd been there, and the uniform? A dark coat, plain and practical. No adornments, no flair. You were not meant to be a spectacle. Then the crowd erupts, or sighs, or turns away. In certain places, they were allowed to keep the clothing of the executed. A strange sort of perquisite, no doubt, and a practice which later faded. Their name became synonymous with the blade itself. Before an execution, there were rituals to observe. They married, they gardened. They raised children who might, for a time, resist the family tradition, but often returned to it when society offered little else. You wipe your boots, wash your hands, and you eat dinner with your family. Especially as the guillotine, hailed as a more humane instrument, became the norm, you might pray, not for the condemned, necessarily, but for the steadiness of your own hand. The morning of a scheduled beheading was not filled with dread, but with repetition. Packing the tools, checking the cart, arriving early to inspect the scaffold. There were always crowds. People came with bread and children. It was to them a kind of macabre theater, and you, the executioner, were the quiet center of it all. A moment of silence before the blade, a clean stroke, and then you return home, often through a back route, avoiding eyes, the same family who will one day inherit your duties. By law, executioners were granted privileges. They were paid by the state. They had official residences in some cities. In Paris, the most famous executioner family, the Sansons, served for 6 generations, executing tens of thousands over more than a century. But few remember them now. Despite their isolation, some executioners found ways to live relatively normal lives. And as the centuries passed, executioners became less feared and more bureaucratized. Still, the job remained unchanged in essence. You kept the tools, you kept the silence, and you kept the blade ready just in case justice needed you. As the candles gutter low and the crowds begin to disperse, we step quietly off the scaffold. The shadows grow longer in the narrow streets of Paris, and somewhere behind closed shutters, another story waits to unfold. Let us follow the scent of intrigue and powder, and wander now into the gilded deception that whispered scandal across a continent. When you're ready, we'll begin the affair of the diamond necklace. Let us begin in a dimly lit salon where powdered wigs catch the candlelight, where gossip hangs in the air like perfume, and where the cost of a single piece of jewelry may one day shake the throne. It is Paris. The year is 1785. The queen is Marie Antoinette. The people whisper. The palace gleams. Something begins to unravel, and beneath the silken layers of courtly life, the diamond necklace itself was astonishing. Too decadent for the new queen, who had no interest in wearing the ghost of her predecessor's scandal around her neck. Commissioned years earlier for the infamous Madame du Barry, the favorite of King Louis XV, it was never claimed. A masterpiece of excess, over 600 diamonds, set in symmetrical cascades of brilliance. The jewelers who made it were nearly ruined, left holding their creation with no royal patron to pay for it. And so the necklace sat, hidden away, too expensive for any private buyer. But then an opportunity emerged. She had a husband of convenience, lovers of utility, and a plan. Or rather, a scheme. Her life was a delicate balancing act between illusion and survival. At the center of this scheme was a woman named Jeanne de Valois-Saint-Remy. Born to a fallen branch of royal blood, Jeanne had the name but none of the status. Clever, charismatic, and entirely unmoored from truth, she styled herself as the Comtesse de la Motte, a title she neither inherited nor deserved. What she needed was a mark. Cardinal de Rohan. The cardinal was ambitious, wealthy, and deeply out of favor with the queen. Years earlier, he had insulted her family while serving as ambassador to Vienna, and Marie Antoinette never forgot. He longed for her forgiveness, her favor, and a return to courtly prominence. Jeanne offered him all of that for a price. She claimed friendship with the queen, said she could arrange letters, said she could arrange meetings, said she could help him help her majesty, and slowly, carefully, she reeled him in. At night, letters arrived, allegedly from the queen, written in delicate script, sealed with familiar wax. They spoke warmly of reconciliation. They invited secret trust. Eventually, Jeanne arranged a meeting in the gardens of Versailles. There, beneath moonlight, the cardinal approached a veiled figure, a woman dressed like the queen, who handed him a rose, murmured a few rehearsed words, and vanished into the hedges. The cardinal believed. Jeanne had her hook in deep. Now it was time to sell a necklace. Jeanne told the cardinal that Marie Antoinette wished to buy the fabled diamond necklace in secret, without the court or the king knowing. But of course the queen needed a discreet go-between. She needed someone who could act in confidence. Someone who was trusted. The cardinal agreed, And with the assistance of forged letters and false intermediaries, the jewelers delivered the necklace into Jean's hands. She took it apart, sold the diamonds across Europe, and vanished. But deception, like wine, does not age quietly. Eventually, whispers turned to questions. The queen was furious, and worse, she was implicated. Though she had nothing to do with the necklace, the story painted her as extravagant, manipulative, and cruel. The public, already resentful of royal opulence, latched onto the tale. It confirmed suspicions, it gave shape to resentment, it turned gossip into fury. A woman spending the cost of a battleship on jewelry, while bread prices soared and unemployment spread. It didn't matter that she was innocent. The image was already carved into the people's minds. The trial that followed was a spectacle. The cardinal was arrested and famously acquitted. Jean was arrested, whipped, and branded, but Marie Antoinette was judged by the court of public opinion, and in that court, no evidence could erase the damage. The affair of the diamond necklace was not the cause of the revolution, but it was a spark in the dry tinder of unrest. And all over a necklace no one truly wanted. As the verdicts are read and the powdered wigs tremble in the summer heat, we step quietly away from the marble halls of Versailles. And we descend now. Beneath the cobbled streets, beneath the polished salons and perfumed scandals, there lies a different world. A city of the dead. When you're ready, we will enter the catacombs of Paris. Just follow the flicker of torchlight and the echo of your own footsteps. Imagine walking through the heart of Paris, bustling cafes, the murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the faint hum of metro trains far below. But deeper still, far below even the foundations of the oldest buildings, lies a world that does not sleep. A world of stacked bones, hollow corridors, and limestone silence. The catacombs. It began, as many things in old cities do, with a problem. In the late 18th century, Paris faced a crisis. One of its oldest cemeteries, less innocents, had become dangerously overfilled. Bodies were buried layer upon layer, sometimes barely covered by soil. When the ground grew too full, walls buckled. The smell was unbearable. Disease followed. At times, rain would unearth the past. And so, the city made a decision. The bones had to be moved. The Louvre and so many other monuments to beauty. But where does one put the remains of 6 million people? Beneath the city lay ancient quarries, tunnels carved by workers centuries earlier to extract limestone for building Notre Dame. Those quarries had long been abandoned, quiet, forgotten, perfect, in a way, for something else. And so, in 1786, the transfer began, by torchlight and lantern, under the direction of the inspector of quarries. Bones were exhumed, blessed, and carefully, or sometimes hurriedly, transported in carts through the streets at night. Priests walked beside them, chanting softly, a funeral procession that lasted years. Once delivered underground, the bones were not tossed carelessly. They were arranged, femurs and skulls stacked with precision, vertebrae placed neatly, even artistically, walls of the dead, as though they might admire their own architecture. In some places, patterns were formed, crosses made of tibias, spirals of skulls, the macabre woven into beauty. But beyond these curated corridors lie countless passageways, raw, dark, and undocumented. There, the bones are simply piled knee-deep in silence. Victor Hugo wandered there, so did Napoleon's troops. The catacombs became more than a solution to overcrowding. They became a symbol of death beneath life, of history beneath modernity. And over time, they drew attention. Secret concerts have been held. Even hidden libraries have been reported, tucked away in forgotten vaults. Writers, poets, and philosophers descended into them. And much later, in the 20th century, a new kind of visitor emerged, the cataphile, urban explorers with flashlights and maps. Some were artists, some were seekers, some simply wandered. Graffiti covers certain walls. Once, a cinema, complete with a screen and seating, was discovered by police deep in the uncharted zones. Of course, there are legends too. Stories of doors that open to nowhere, of footsteps heard in empty tunnels. But limestone, bone, and the echo of your own breath, it's easy to understand how such stories begin, of maps that change, of individuals who entered and were never found again. Are they true? No one can say for sure. But standing in the quiet of the catacombs, with nothing, not all of the catacombs are open to the public. In fact, most are not. There are hundreds of kilometers of tunnels, many of them unmapped, unstable, or sealed. Only a small portion, the ossuary, is curated for visitors beneath the place Denfert Rochereau. There, a plaque greets you at the entrance. It reads, "All right, c'est ici l'Empire de la Mort." Stop, this is the Empire of Death, and so it is. But it is not frightening, not really. There is something peaceful in the stillness, in the quiet endurance of bone, in the anonymity of the dead, stripped of title, wealth, or scandal. Here, the executioner and the queen rest side by side, and no one asks their names. As we surface once more, blinking into candlelight and the warm scent of honeyed soap, we step into yet another layer of history. Too much, one not of death, but of ritual. Not of hardship, but of hollow luxury. Now we arrive at Versailles, golden, gilded, exhausting, and altogether, when you're ready, we'll begin our final segment. A day in Versailles, the most boring luxury you can imagine. Imagine yourself waking not to the soft chime of an alarm, but to the creak of a gilded door and the rustle of silk. Your eyes open to find a chamberlain already drawing back the curtains. Another lights the hearth. Yet another places your slippers at the foot of your bed. It's not yet 8 o'clock a.m. and you, a noble of the court of Versailles, have already become a public spectacle. This is your morning, and everyone is watching. Versailles was not just a palace, it was a machine. A living, breathing organism built to display power, not through violence or wealth alone, but through ritualized boredom. Everything was codified. Everything was performed. And nothing, absolutely nothing, was private. The king's day began and ended with ceremony. Even his waking was public. The lever, or rising, involved layers of attendants, nobles, and courtiers watching as he was dressed, bathed, and prepared, not because he needed help, but because each role was a privilege, a status, a statement. Imagine dozens of men competing for the honor of handing you your shirt. Now imagine that shirt weighs several kilograms and must be worn beneath 3 more layers, all while the fireplace smolders in the July heat. For you, as a courtier, life is ruled by etiquette. There is a correct way to enter a room, a correct way to bow, a correct way to fold a letter. The wrong gesture, the wrong glance, even a misplaced tone might cost you favor. And favor is everything. Versailles had no private economy, no personal property in the modern sense. One survived through patronage. One rose or fell at the whim of the king, or the ripple of gossip that slid like perfume down the mirrored halls, unless invited. Meals are public. You may dine in the presence of the king, but not with him. You stand for hours, waiting for the smallest nod, the faintest gesture that might offer an inch of approval. Bread is served cold. The meat is lukewarm. Every tree is in its place. Every fountain choreographed. Even nature is made to perform. The conversation is stifled by fear of impropriety. You glide like a feather caught in routine. And all the while, the palace gleams. The gardens, of course, are extraordinary, but as relief. You waited because he was worth waiting for. They stretch for miles, trimmed, sculpted, and ordered. You walk, if allowed, along the manicured paths. You do not wander. You do not run. At court, boredom was not a flaw. It was a feature. Leisure was a weapon. Time spent waiting for an audience, for a glance, for a decision, reminded everyone of the king's absolute centrality. Others were attended by servants even in these most personal moments. Even the queen, Marie Antoinette, found herself exhausted by the ritual. She often fled to her small estate, the Petit Trianon, to escape the demands of court life. There, she played shepherdess. Not as mockery, to live simply, even in play, was a rebellion against the palace's golden cage. And then there is the toileting. There were no private bathrooms in the palace. Not in the way we understand them. Freedom was fleeting. Chamber pots were carried behind screens. Some nobles used the gardens. Etiquette extended even to the most human of functions, but in presentation, you did not simply excuse yourself. You performed your absence with dignity. As the day unfolds, hours spent standing, bowing, nodding, and pretending, you begin to understand the great irony of Versailles, that in a place of ultimate luxury, comfort was rare, that in a palace of golden halls, and that in a court defined by attention, no one truly saw each other. As the chandeliers dim and the echoes of courtly laughter fade into candlelight, you return to your chambers. Servants remove your shoes. Another adjusts the fire, and still another ensures your powdered wig is properly stored. You fall asleep not in privacy. The performance ends, only until morning. And now, dear listener, we draw our evening to a close. We have walked among the shunned, the scandalized, the buried, and the bored. We have watched blades fall, scandals rise, bones shift, and courtiers whisper, and still you are here, resting in the comfort of quiet and the stillness of stories told slowly. May the past, in all its strange forms, soothe you. May its rhythms, harsh or hollow, make your present feel softer by contrast. And may you drift now toward rest. Good night.